Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, the team has hired another coach. He's on the offensive side of things. We'll tell you who it is and what he's going to do. Plus, we'll take a little bit of a deep dive, get some insight on the quarterback situation in Chicago. What's going on with Justin Fields? Could he potentially be on the trade block? Well, we'll find out. Plus, we'll take a look at 5 guys the Raiders may have interest in as far as the draft coming up at the end of April. Your calls and texts will close out the show. It's all coming up on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raider podcast, February 17th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raider podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen each and every day. Remember, you can find the Locked On Raider podcast free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube. Thanks to my man Ari. I tell you about it each and every day that he makes sure that we're up on YouTube. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be there. And the show is growing in a major way on YouTube. We definitely appreciate that. Just under 4,000 subscriptions right now. So think that that's really good. Really good progress in a very short amount of time. So thank you to Ari. He does a great job. And thank you to everyone who checks it out on YouTube. And you can check out Ari on Twitter at Ari Produces. Today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And Raider Nation, let's go ahead and get started. Got a lot to get to on today's show. News and notes here in segment number 1. And the Raiders hired a coach on the offensive side of things, Matt Lombardi. He is the little brother of Mick Lombardi. He's an offensive assistant and assistant wide receivers coach. And he spent the last 3 seasons in Carolina as an assistant quarterback coach under Matt Rule and Steve Wilks. He'll be moving away from the quarterbacks in Vegas and working with the wide receivers. I'm sure he'll do just fine with the wide receivers. You got Devontae Adams, you got Hunter Renfrow, and a bunch of others. So, yeah, there'll be some nice talent to be working with when it comes to young Matt Lombardi. And the thing about it is, I remember that we had a text on yesterday's show from John in the South Bay in L.A. talking about potentially hiring senior coaches or former head coaches to help out. And I know that Matt Lombardi and also Scott Turner, Norv Turner's son, those aren't former head coaches. They're not, senior coaches or any of that, but they are offensive minds. They are guys that have been around the NFL for a very long time. And I don't think that you could ever have too many coaches on that side of the ball. Hell, I don't think you could have too many coaches on the defensive side of the ball either, just to bounce ideas off of. Right, you have Josh McDaniels. You know it's his offense. Mick Lombardi is the offensive coordinator, but he's not calling the plays. But they are all working together and collaborating together to put the offensive game plan together. So I think that that's okay. I think that's a good thing. I wouldn't mind seeing a couple guys on the defensive side of the ball to help out with Patrick Graham and put together a game plan with him. Again, more NFL minds that you have, the better. I mentioned on Thursday's show that Rob Ryan is also on the coaching staff. He's a senior analyst, senior defensive analyst for the Raiders. And so, again, just having guys that have been there, done that, helping out with the guys that are actually calling all the shots can never be a bad thing, in my opinion. Also, I wanted to talk about Justin Fields real quick. Of course, the Bears have the number 1 overall pick in this upcoming draft. There's been conversation, even though the Bears just drafted Justin Fields a couple seasons ago and really haven't seen a whole lot from him. Been a very small sample size. He ran for over 1,100 yards in 2022, but didn't do a whole lot with his arm. Right, I mean, he had not a lot of touchdowns, but he had about 17 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. So didn't do real good with his arm. But then again, in Chicago, they don't really have a whole lot of weapons. But there's a lot of reports and even rumors out there that he could be on the trade block. So I reached out to my good friend Courtney Cronin, who works for ESPN and covers the Bears like a glove. And I asked her straight up about, the smoke and the rumors that are out there about Justin Fields being shopped. This is what she had to say. Plus, I had a follow-up question for her as well that had to do with Champ Kelly, who's the assistant GM of the Silver and Black. So here's Courtney Cronin on the smoke and rumors about Justin Fields.
I think that it's still too early to tell. And I know that there have been some reports out there about they're shopping Justin Fields. I haven't heard anything concrete on that right now, but let's look at this from like a realistic perspective. If you're Ryan Poles, general manager of this team, didn't draft Justin Fields, but you've affirmed a commitment to Justin Fields, you still owe yourself the time and the flexibility to do your due diligence at that position and make sure that you have all options exhausted. So whether that's keeping Justin Fields in the fold, building around him, using that number 1 draft pick to trade back, or potentially using that number 1 draft pick on a quarterback and trading Justin Fields. And I think the thing I always want to point out to people is that no matter what Ryan Poles said about Fields during his season-ending press conference, if an offer comes in that you can't refuse, let's say Carolina says, hey, we can't get all the way up till, like, we don't want to get involved in free agency with, Derek Carr, with Aaron Rodgers. We realize we're so far down the list for those quarterbacks, but we can get up from 9 to 1 and we'll throw a player in the mix, or we'll give you 2 first-round draft picks. If you're Ryan Poles, you can't say no to that, Q. So I look at this situation where if the Bears end up moving on from Justin Fields, it may not be an indictment, or it may not be, oh, well, he really wasn't the guy. They were just posturing in the offseason. They may very well still really love this guy and think he's a great quarterback down the line. But like, if there's an offer that comes in that is a franchise altering offer in terms of the draft capital you can build for now and later, I don't see how they say no to that. But yeah, there's a lot of scenarios to work through here, and it's going to be a busy couple months keeping up with all of the smoke that's out there, just because this is such a pivotal moment for this franchise and altering the direction they're going to go.
Well, it's a huge moment as well for the Raiders in their situation. This is the first time that I've ever covered the team, and they needed a quarterback, and they do, right? And there's many different ways and reasons to look at Chicago. Champ Kelly is part of the Raiders front office. He was there with Chicago. He's an assistant GM right now with the Raiders. Do you know how much of an influence, if any, he had on bringing Justin Fields to Chicago?
I mean, Champ was in that building. I'm fairly certain he was director of player personnel before he was the assistant GM with the Raiders. And I know that he was a well-respected member and he's throughout the NFL for sure. But specifically within that front office in Chicago, he had been there for a very long time after he came over from Denver. And there's a reason that he interviewed for that Denver GM job 3 years ago now. He's qualified for it. And I know from an evaluation standpoint, he has, his fingerprints were all over the roster and in a good way, because he has a great eye for talent. So I think that's an important tie to keep an eye on. And Justin Fields' name has not been rumored to Vegas just because the Rodgers and Devontae Adams connection is so strong, and that makes a ton of sense. But I think that there are other options that teams like that, maybe the not so obvious options, can look into. It's just a matter, I think, of, for the Chicago Bears, they've got to come to the evaluation and realization first. Have you done all your work on Justin Fields? Like, do you want to build around him? If the answer is yes, then you proceed forward. But to the point where it's, unless you get an offer that is so good you can't say no, that you would stick with your plan. Because Poles said he'd have to be blown away by a quarterback in the draft to move on from Fields. And I truly believe that he's being, forthright about that. But all that said, they have a big decision here to make in the next couple months based on the conversations that a team like a Vegas or a team like Carolina or others that are looking for a quarterback might be having.
So there you go. She doesn't think that he's on the trade block, but then again, she said, hey, if the Bears get wowed, by an offer, then maybe they would trade him. I doubt that they trade him, but again, it's something that I wanted to at least investigate, at least go ahead and talk about it, see if there was any kind of smoke to the fire that could be potentially out of there. A lot of reports coming out of the Senior Bowl is that the impression that most folks came away with is that Justin Fields will be on the blocks. And remember, the guys that are there now in place are not the guys that drafted Justin Fields. So if they were to move on from him, I could see that. Also, I had one more question, or I asked her multiple questions, but I wanted one more soundbite to bring to the table today, and that's if she sees any of the Big Four quarterbacks, talking about Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, any of those Big Four, if she sees those guys as potential franchise quarterbacks for any team in the NFL.
Honestly, not yet. We can change our opinion when we hear how you hear the rumors from teams, and you'll hear who's going to rise, who's going to fall. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Bryce Young seems like he's going to be the number 1 overall pick, whether it's with the Bears or with somebody else, trading the pick for the Bears. But he'll be the first quarterback taken, we think.
Right.
But I don't look at this group and say there's an Andrew Luck or there's a Trevor Lawrence in this group. And that's okay. But I think that group's next year. That group is the Caleb Williams and the Drake Mays and maybe even Quinn Ewers from Texas. This year's quarterback class is good, but not in that elite upper echelon where you have people that are future franchise guys right off the bat.
So there's Courtney Cronin right there just talking about the big four quarterbacks that we're really looking at and talking about guys that will be drafted in the first round of April's draft. And, she didn't really see it right now, but also said, hey, we might change our mind later. Of course, the combine's still got to go on. The pro days have got to go on. So things can change quick, fast, and in a hurry. And when we're talking about quarterbacks, let me give a little side note real quick because I did talk about Anthony Richardson on Thursday's show. I did play some sound from Mel Kiper and Todd McShay, and I said that Anthony Richardson was a big question mark for me. I just wasn't sure because he has a huge ceiling. Like many people have said, he's the most athletic guy. He could potentially be the best quarterback in this upcoming draft. He could be very Cam Newton-like, or he could end up being a bust because you've seen him be, bad in college at Florida. You saw him bounce the ball like he was throwing a baseball across the diamond. You've just seen him make decisions where you're scratching your head and wondering. So I said, he concerns me because he could be Cam Newton or he could turn into Jamarcus Russell. Well, as soon as I said Jamarcus Russell, and I roll my eyes if you're watching on YouTube, apparently that people took that as I was being disrespectful and I was comparing him to Jamarcus Russell because he has a strong arm and he's black. Let me tell you, not that I feel like I have to explain myself all the time. That's definitely not the reason why I said that, right? The reason I said it is because Jamarcus Russell had a lot of upside and everyone was very excited about him, including myself. One of the most excited people I knew about Jamarcus Russell was me. When the Raiders drafted him, I thought, man, this dude's going to throw the ball over the yard. He could throw it 70 yards from a knee. Little did I realize that if you're on the knee and you try to throw it 70 yards, it doesn't matter because you're down, right? I mean, there was so much to get excited about, and he just didn't work out. Not comparing them just because they're both black and have strong arms, and that's silly, but of course, that's a lot of the feedback I received after Thursday's show. So let me just let it be known that is not the reason. But he could end up being very Cam Newton-like, or he could end up washing out of the league and not being a quarterback at all. I mean, that's really the range, and nobody knows. Anyone who's a draft analyst has been saying the same thing. They just don't know what he's going to do in the NFL. So that's why I said it. So, again, I hate the fact that I have to explain all the time. But there's always going to be someone that's offended about something. So I will go ahead and throw it out there that is the reason. Now, if you choose to listen and believe it, fine. That's on you. But let me just let it be known because, again, I got plenty of that feedback, and I have no problem coming out and telling you, no, that is not the case. Again, I was one of the most excited people when the Raiders drafted Jamarcus Russell. And, oh, by the way, I don't know if you check YouTube, I'm a black man as well. Right, so I'm going to be the last guy that's going to come out and try to slander somebody because they're black. That just doesn't make any sense. But, again, here we are. So there's that. That's all I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, kind of news and notes of the day. Coming up in segment number 2, going to talk about 5 guys that aren't quarterbacks that the Raiders could be looking at in the upcoming draft because, again, we'll have plenty of time to talk about quarterbacks. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And we're at the midway point of the NBA season, actually a little bit more than the midway point. It's the All-Star break now, and, well, it's the perfect time to download FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book because of new customers, you can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and even how many threes are drained in a game. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to take an early look into the NFL draft and look at 5 guys. We talked about 5 free agents on Thursday's show. Now I want to take a look at 5 guys that could be in the draft that the Raiders could be looking at. And they could be looking at number 7. They could be trading back and trying to collect more draft capital and then drafting these guys. They could be looking at them in round 2 or maybe even potentially round 3. I'm really basing this off of Dane Brugler's top 100 board that he put out on The Athletic, and I respect him a lot as a draft analyst and really a player evaluator, right? I mean, again, this is not a mock draft that he put out, but he did put out a top 100 list, and I thought that it was, pretty good. So I'm not going to go through all 100 and put together a massive big board for the silver and black, but I thought since I did 5 free agents, why not 5 guys that could be potential dudes that the Raiders are looking at as far as draft picks, first, second round, maybe even third round, whatever the case may be, and not quarterbacks. right? Because, again, we're going to have plenty of conversation when it comes to quarterbacks. And it's funny, as I looked at this, I started thinking about what the Raiders need, and I started thinking about offensive line. I started thinking about defensive help, a lot of defensive help, defensive tackle, cornerback, linebacker, safety. I mean, there's all levels of the defense, but I realized when I put together these 5 that the majority of it is defense. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first one, it's not necessarily in the order of, what I want them to look at or like my favorite guy or whatever. Matter of fact, the last guy that I'll tell you about, number 5, is actually the highest ranked person on Dane Brugler's top 100 board. So I just don't think that that's a realistic option for the Raiders. I don't think he'll be available for the Raiders to draft. So that's why I put him 5. It's kind of like that unrealistic hope that I might have, but a guy that I'd be excited about. So let's go ahead and start out with number 1, and that's Christian Gonzalez, the quarterback out of Oregon. He's actually number 5 on Dane Brugler's top 100 board. Gonzalez is 6'2", 200 pounds. He's really good in man coverage, can play outside and in the slot. That's really good traits. We know Patrick Graham wants to run a real man-heavy scheme, but does he have the guys to get it done? No. And when Nate Hobbs was able to be out there and before he got injured in, week 5 against Kansas City, he was out there and he was really physical. And when he returned, especially against the Chargers, he was out there and he was physical and he brought that, that again, physicality that really Patrick Graham is going to be looking for. So I look at a guy like Christian Gonzalez and think, at 6'2", 200 pounds, he could be that guy on the outside, as we all know that the Raiders need corner help, and he could play that man-to-man coverage. Sticking with the cornerbacks, Joey Porter Jr. is another guy pretty excited about. He's out of Penn State. He's number 11 on Dane Brugler's top 100 board. He's also 6'2". He's a little lighter, 198 pounds. But again, press corner. He attacks receivers the same way his dad did blockers. That's basically the write-up that Dane Brugler has. Long arms, is fluid, doesn't have explosive quickness, but he can play, right? Didn't have any interceptions last year, but he wasn't thrown at that much either, and he's a really good tackler. So the only thing that concerns me about him is the fact that he didn't have any interceptions. I say it all the time. If you create turnovers in high school, you'll probably create turnovers in college. If you create turnovers in college, you'll create turnovers in the NFL. So last season for Joey Porter Jr. not to get any is a little bit concerning, but like Brugler said, they didn't throw at him. They didn't throw his way too often. So that's another guy I'm looking at. If you're going to look for a corner, Christian Gonzalez or Joey Porter Jr., those are 2 corners. If you're going to go early at the cornerback position, I would have no problem with. How about Brian Branch, the safety out of Alabama? Anyone who's been listening to this show for a while knows I'm a big fan of Alabama and Alabama players. He's number 16 on Dane Brugler's top 100 board. He said, close your eyes and imagine a Raiders safety who's a great tackler and can stay attached in coverage. Well, you're trading up to number 1 to go get him. He's 6 foot, 193 pounds. He plays slot corner for Alabama, but projects as an elite safety. And I've had a lot of people hit me up and say, Q, what do you think of Brian Branch? What do you think about Brian Branch? He's a dude who can play. And we all know that the safety position needs to be upgraded. I know Trayvon Merrick is a guy that I was excited about coming out of TCU. Looked like he took a step back in 2022. I don't know if it was a scheme. I don't know if it was the hip injury, but he took a step back. Jerron Harmon, I believe that the Raiders are going to try to re-sign him. He was a free agent that they brought in, but he's getting a little bit older. I think he's still got some burn in him, but at some point, you're going to need some fresh, new, young safeties. And so I could see a guy like Brian Branch being on the radar of the Silver and Black. So that's a guy that excites me. Again, number 16 overall on Dane Brugler's top 100 board. Now, I pivot away from the defensive side of the ball and one guy on the offensive side of things, and it's not an offensive lineman. And the reason why I didn't pick offensive lineman here, because I only picked 5 guys, and I think that the draft is pretty deep when it comes to offensive linemen, so you can probably get a tackle a little bit later. Maybe the Raiders address the tackle position coming up in free agency. But I went with Jalen Hyatt, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, 6 foot, 188 pounds. He's number 22 on Dane Brugler's top 100 board, and the reason I grabbed him is because I feel like the Raiders need some elite speed, and that's exactly who Jalen Hyatt is. He's elite speed. And again, this doesn't have to be picked at number 7, right? I mean, let's make no mistake about it. I'm not just selecting for the first round. I'm just selecting 5 guys that intrigue me. So I don't know where you would get him. Again, he's number 22 on Brugler's board, but doesn't mean he's going to go number 22 overall, right? I mean, most teams won't have him ranked that high as far as where they would draft him at, and we'll see where he goes. But the guy, as it's written up, polished route runner who can uncover quickly in the short to intermediate part of the field. He won't be valued this high, but for his coveted field stretching speed, tracking skills, and reliable hands, the product will have value in the top 25. So there you go. And again, I just think that as good as Davante Adams is, I think the Raiders just need some stretching the field type speed. I know Mac Hollins is a guy that was able to get down the field pretty well for the Raiders. He also is a free agent. Who knows if he returns in 2023? But even if he does, maybe not force him to be that guy. If Jalen Hyatt has one responsibility and that's just stretch the field, that's not a bad thing, right? Whoever the quarterback is, if you have Davante Adams, that's a big-time weapon. You have Hunter Renfrow, that's a big-time weapon. Darren Waller, I'm assuming all those guys are going to be there, big-time weapon. Then all of a sudden you have someone that can stretch the field, kind of similar to what Henry Ruggs was able to do, stretch the field. And obviously, we all know that Henry Ruggs is no longer in the league, but he was playing that role where he wasn't real extensive as far as his route running goes, but for what he's asked to do, which was get down the field quick, fast, and hurry, he was able to do that and change the dynamic of the Raiders offense. I could see them going after a guy like Jalen Hyatt to go ahead and continue to add some weapons on the offensive side of things. I mean, look, I want the Raiders defense to be really good. I really do. I mean, I would love to see them look similar to what Philadelphia looked like or what San Francisco looks like, but we just saw a Super Bowl that ended 38-35 with two teams that have pretty good defenses, right? Philadelphia has a really good defense. They give 38 points. So, obviously, you got to be able to score points, and score some more. Jalen Hyatt would help the Raiders do that. And my final guy is one that I believe is unrealistic. I don't think that he'll be on the board even at number 7, and I don't see the Raiders trading up to go get a guy that's not a quarterback, and that's Jalen Carter, defensive tackle out of Georgia, 6'3", 310. He's the number 1 guy on Dane Brugler's top 100 board, and I really don't have to go into elaborate detail, right? Jalen Carter is a dude. He's a big-time stud on that Georgia defense, a 2-time defending national champions now, back-to-back national champions. I mean, the guy is just he's explosive from the interior of the defensive line, which is exactly what the Raiders need. The write-up on him is when attempting to sum up Jalen Carter's impact, I keep coming back to 3 words: special block destruction. Not only does Carter have a rare combination of body control, quickness, and power, he's also highly skilled at using all 3 traits in unison to defeat blocks. While I have similar grades on him and Will Anderson Jr., the value of Carter's interior disruption is what gives him the edge. And so that's the one. If something crazy could happen and maybe there'd be a Laramie Tunsil type draft day drop for Jalen Carter, maybe there's a video come out of him of, I don't know, whatever. I don't even want to say it. I'm not going to say it like Laramie Tunsil because we all remember he was hitting the bong and he dropped in the draft and Miami ended up going and getting him, and that ended up being just fine. I don't know who leaked that. I forget who leaked it, but it was some family member. It was pretty ugly. I remember being in the draft in Chicago when that happened. But if Jalen Carter could drop to 7, that'd be awesome. I would love to see that. Let's just put it like that. I don't want to put no dirt on his name, and plus I'll get someone mad at me, so I'm not going to do that. So, if he was there at 7, I would love for the Raiders to go get him, but I don't believe he'll have that opportunity. I'm sure he'll be gone probably no later than maybe 4. I just think, matter of fact, he might go number 1. The Bears, who have the number 1 overall pick, might end up just sticking with Justin Fields, probably will end up sticking with Justin Fields, and just go and get the best defensive player, which is Jalen Carter, and call it a day. And there would be nothing wrong with that. So he could end up going number 1 overall in April's upcoming draft. But those are the 5 guys that I really have my mind on right now. The top guys, right? There's plenty of under-the-radar guys. There's guys that are going to come out of the combine that you're going to say, wow, that dude could play. Maybe there's guys that you'll notice at the not the Pro Bowl, but their pro days that you think, oh, man, I wasn't really paying attention to that guy. Again, there's a ton of talent in this upcoming draft. I'm just pointing out 5 guys that I'd be intrigued by: Christian Gonzalez, cornerback out of Oregon; Joey Porter, cornerback out of Penn State; Brian Branch, safety out of Alabama; Jalen Hyatt, the wide receiver out of Tennessee; and Jalen Carter, defensive tackle out of Georgia. That's all I got for you in segment number 2. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about a game that I'm very excited about, which is the Ultimate Football GM. If you ever wanted to put your GM hat on, if you ever wanted to play the role of Dave Ziegler and put together a draft board and hire coaches and put together a game plan and navigate your team through a season, this is the game for you. Ultimate Football GM. It's a challenging, realistic game. It's a lot of fun, and a lot of people are talking about it. Matter of fact, there's even a Locked On League with Locked On fans all over the world. So you can end up being the ultimate Locked On Football GM. You choose Locked On League in the app to join. You can create your own football dynasty. All Locked On Raider podcast listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when they use the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. Again, it's Locked On, all caps. Make sure you check it out today. You want to download the game? It's easy. Ultimate-GM.com or look it up on the App Store. Again, Ultimate-GM.com. The Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with JD in Salt Lake City. He's calling to talk about the quarterback position and who he'd prefer if the Raiders made a move at number 7. Here he is, JD in Salt Lake City.
Hey, Q, this is JD from Salt Lake City. I just want to call and give my 2 cents on the quarterback position in this draft. If we do draft a quarterback with that 7th pick or move up, I actually like Will Levis the most out of all 3 of the first quarterbacks. Just because there's Bryce Young, his size. It's really hard to overcome size. You can't teach size. You can teach other things that you can develop, but the thing you can't do is size. So the only thing you can do is you can change it to like a 7-step drop or 9-step drop in order for him to be able to see over the front line, to see the center of the field. But when you do that, you make yourself susceptible to pass rush on the outside, and with the pass rushers that are in the division, good luck. If our quarterback has to do a 7 or 9-step drop every time to throw down the field, people are going to eat it for dinner. And then with C.J. Stroud, he has the size, which I like, and he has the arm talent, which I like, but I don't think he has the athleticism and his playmaking ability. So I think more of the total package of the 3 things that you're describing is actually Will Levis. I think he has the size, he has the athleticism, he has the strength, he definitely has the arm strength. His accuracy could improve, but that's something that can be taught. And I think that he's probably, in my opinion, I actually would prefer them to draft Will Levis if they're going to go that route. But other than that, I would actually like them to stay affordable with the quarterback if they do a veteran, because it lets you spend that money elsewhere on the team. The team has so many needs elsewhere that if you can get, let's say, Baker Mayfield for $8 million a year, that opens up other positions for you to get the players you need now, and then be able to draft and develop a quarterback later. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And I'm on the fence with these quarterbacks, man. I feel like you can find the good and the bad in all 4 of the guys, right? I mean, really, honestly, Bryce Young, I think he's probably the best one out of all 4, but he's got small size. So is he going to be able to hold up to the rigors of the NFL? Then you got C.J. Stroud. He's an Ohio State quarterback. A lot of people kind of frown on that, right? And he's a guy that was very hesitant to use his legs. Even though he has the athleticism, he was very hesitant to use his legs. That's similar to what Derek Carr was, right? I mean, that was one of the big complaints, hesitant to use his legs. Now, when he went up against Georgia, he did. And it was like, wow, that's what everyone was trying to push him to do, but he didn't do it. So, that's a concern. Will Levis, obviously he's unpolished. Anthony Richardson, unpolished. There's a lot of question marks around all those guys, but then you could also look at them and see all the good in them and say, yeah, that could be that franchise quarterback. And really, they all could end up being that great franchise quarterback, or none of them could end up being that franchise quarterback. You just don't know. It's so hard to evaluate. So I think the best quarterbacks are probably going to be available next season. So thank you so much for that call. I appreciate you. Up next is a text from Joby One Kenobi in Arlington, Texas. He says, Q, I believe our next quarterback will be Jimmy G, and here's why. I think that will happen. McDaniels knows him very well, and when he gets hurt, McDaniels will have Stidham to come in. I believe that's the plan. If it fails because Garoppolo gets hurt, it might get him another year, and then we'll probably move up next year in the draft and get a top quarterback. That's from Joby One Kenobi in Arlington, Texas. And I'll tell you right now, as simple as that plan sounded, that is not a plan that I like. Right? Okay, go get Jimmy G, and when he gets hurt, Stidham will be there, and that can buy him an extra year. I'm not interested in buying Josh McDaniels another year. I think this year is huge for him, Dave Ziegler, and everyone. Like, they've got to win. And I thought they were going to win last year, and they didn't. They won 6 games. I'm not really interested in them finding a way to buy another year. I want them to buy another year because they won. That's where I'm at. I think there's a ton of pressure on these guys. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe Mark Davis has said, hey, build it, take your time, it'll be fine. Maybe he said that. I just find that hard to believe. I think there's a ton of pressure on these guys to get it done this year. We'll see how it all shakes out, but I don't think there's a next year if you're not seeing a lot of improvement from what we saw last year. That's just me, though. That's not any kind of inside information. That's just my gut feeling I have. So thank you so much for that text. Next up, I got a call from Raider 541. He's calling to talk about some defensive help and also the quarterback position as well. Here he is, Raider 541.
Hey, Q, this is Raider 541, and I was just calling on a couple of my thoughts on defense and the quarterback position. My thoughts on defense, I was thinking this year coming up in free agency, that money that we got from Carr, I was thinking that maybe we go big in free agency, try to get a couple good defensive players, some big names maybe to complement Max Crosby. I haven't had time to look at all the free agents for defensive players, but maybe a couple spend some money on defense in the free agency because we all know we need it. And if we don't get an Aaron Rodgers, we can use that money for the defense. If we do get an Aaron Rodgers, then I say we definitely use a lot of those draft picks that we have this year and bring in some good players because Max Crosby's probably getting tired of being the whole defense himself, at least from where I'm watching. I also liked your idea on Baker Mayfield. I think that he's a sleeper quarterback that nobody's really paying attention to, that he wants to win, he has the ability to win, and I think if you give him a good offense, he can go out there and make it happen, and he does have a little bit of swagger about him. So I think that's a possibility, and I don't think he's going to cost as much as a lot of these other guys. So those are just some of my ideas. I think we go big defense, free agent, maybe draft an offensive lineman somewhere in the 5th round. Our offensive line wasn't too terrible, but it doesn't hurt to go and get a couple guys to really tighten it up. But those are just some of my ideas. Love the show.
Thank you for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And there's no doubt, man, the defense needs to be improved in a major way, and that's all levels of the defense. D-line, linebackers, secondary, it all needs to be addressed. But at the end of the day, it's always going to boil down to the big elephant in the room until we know who that big elephant in the room is going to be. And I'm talking about the trigger man, the quarterback. Who's that going to be? I'm not big on Mayfield, but I do realize, like I mentioned on Thursday's show, he could be a possibility. He could be a lot cheaper than a lot of these guys. You don't have to give up draft capital to get him like you would Aaron Rodgers. He's more, I think, more reliable than Jimmy G because he's not going to get injured as often. But I'm not real high on Mayfield. But, you never know. Josh McDaniels, again, worked him out when he was coming out of college, out of Oklahoma, and the Patriots had no opportunity to go and draft Baker Mayfield. So there was obviously some interest that he had in him. I don't know how much interest there is. And, again, that was something that was mentioned to me a couple times on Radio Row when we were in Phoenix, Arizona, and it started with Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk. So there you go. Thank you so much for that call. I do appreciate you. One more text and we'll close out the show. Raider Bean from Phoenix. He hit us up and said, hey, Q, longtime listener, love your podcast, can't get enough of them, but first time ever tapping into the show by text or call. I guess I'll go by Raider Bean from Phoenix since everyone has a nickname. Just wanted to say I truly believe that quarterback has to be the move in the first round for us this year, regardless of Rodgers trade or not. Rodgers to me would be great, but he's just a stopgap. Ideally with Rodgers, you won't be in position to draft your future quarterback. And when he ultimately does hang it up, we're stuck in quarterback purgatory again. That's why I think we should take advantage of having the pick to do it now. Love the idea of Stroud sitting for a couple years behind Aaron if possible, but ultimately believe quarterback in the draft should be priority number one. If we can't get Aaron to go, then that's great as well. Let me know what you think. That's Raider Bean from Phoenix. Thank you so much for that text. And again, like I said earlier in the show, that's going to be the big elephant in the room, man. The quarterback position is obviously the most important position in the game. You got to have a quarterback. Just who is it going to be, right? Aaron Rodgers, we all know what it would take to get him, draft capital, and it's going to cost a lot of money. Not that they can't do it. They can. And I think that being in Las Vegas, that's probably – I'm just going off my gut. I feel like that's probably their priority. They probably want that more than anything so they can be competitive. especially in the AFC West when you have Mahomes, you have Herbert, and you have Russell Wilson. I could see them wanting Aaron Rodgers in a major way and then having Jarrett Stidham sit behind him. And then when he's ready to roll in a couple years, maybe at that point they can find a way to go get their quarterback, find their quarterback, break down and analyze enough quarterbacks that, okay, this could be the long-term solution. Or maybe at that point they feel like Jarrett Stidham could be the long-term solution. I'm not too sure. Maybe they could pull a Kansas City Chiefs, be really good for a couple years with Aaron Rodgers. Then all of a sudden they have an opportunity to go get a big-time quarterback, and they go and make a move and trade up to go get him and don't mind giving up a lot for him because, well, they have the rest of the team built. I mean, there's so many different options. I think, again, just my gut feeling, which is what I always roll with, I think Aaron Rodgers to this new staff is probably option A. Jimmy G is probably option B. I would say after that, maybe a Baker Mayfield is C. I would say Jarrett Stidham and Baker Mayfield might be C. I think Jarrett Stidham, they're going to bring him back for a backup quarterback role. That's just my gut feeling. I know a lot of people say roll with Stidham, let him start. I think that he's primed to be a backup number one for the Silver and Black. But again, that's just my gut feeling. I could be way off on that. We'll obviously see. Time will tell what direction they go in. But that's all we got time for on today's show. I definitely appreciate you each and every day chiming in for the show. All the calls and texts we do appreciate. 707-654-4693. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll be back on Monday here on Locked On Raiders podcast, making it happen, make it do what it do. Maybe we'll have some more information. Maybe we'll have some more news and notes to jump into. Who knows what we'll be talking about on Monday? Only the weekend will be able to let us know about that. Maybe Aaron Rodgers will come out of his 4-day dark retreat, whatever he's doing, and come out and say, yeah, I want to be traded. No, I'm going to stay in Green Bay. Who knows? We'll have plenty to talk about as we do each and every day. It's not like the offseason is ever slow when it comes to the Silver or Black. Again, thanks so much for making the show your first listen each and every day. Remember, you can find the Locked On Raider podcast free and available on all platforms. Till Monday, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.